Hello! Today we are getting to know an open work weaving. We are already familiar with the holder woven this way. It is very popular, but I believe that the pattern can be used not only for weaving a holder, but also for weaving different kinds of articles. In this case, I'd like to show you several models. Here is a basket woven using this pattern. A baby carriage, the base of it is woven in this pattern as well. A regular casket. Pay attention to the pattern, it is the same as well. I've enjoyed weaving square boxes with this type of pattern. You see, it can be one-colored, two-colored and three-colored like in the box. And on a big box this pattern is well seen, and it looks very interesting, very decorative. So the opportunities of using this open work pattern are rather wide. This open work pattern has something in common with layer-wise and zigzag patterns. It is very important to weave it around a base, a form. Why? Because these open work locks we connect the poles with pull the weaving toward inside. That is why if we weave with no base, the weaving will get narrower upwards. That is why we use a form. Then look, we have prepared. I always frame this pattern with a rope. So I have woven a couple of rows in the technique of a rope, left 2 working tubes, and then I take the tubes. This time I'm going to weave in 2 colors, orange and brown. And in 8s I put them onto the poles of the base. This way, alternating. At first a brown 8, then an orange 8. The next one is brown. An orange one embraces the next 2 poles. Take a brown one, embrace the next 2 poles. And this way up to the end of the row. In this case, the number of the poles is divisible 4, because the pattern is 2-colored. If you weave a 3-colored pattern, then the number of the poles has to be divisible 6. So, we are finishing the first row. An orange one and the last brown 8. Look, from each gap between the poles there is a working tube sticking out. The next actions. We take the extreme tube from a couple. It is very important not to get confused in the second row. If we weave a second and third row, then the sequence repeats. But it is important not to get confused in this second row. We take the extreme, in this case brown tube, embrace the pole with it and lead it behind the second one. Pass on to the next, to the orange ones. Take the extreme, embrace the first one, lead behind the second pole. Take the extreme brown tube, embrace the first one, lead behind the second one, and continue weaving the second row this way up to the end. Embrace the first pole, lead behind the second one. It is very important for this pattern to have the rigid poles of the base. You see, in this case I have made them of office paper, one sheet of paper cut in two, and I have rolled the tubes around a refill, so they are rigid enough compared to the working tubes. Embrace the first pole, lead behind the second one. Embrace the first one, lead behind the second. And this way up to the end of the row. Take the extreme tube, embrace the first one, lead behind the second. The extreme one. That's all. We have reached the end of the row, and we see that all the working tubes of the upper row look in one direction, and every other tube sticks out. The row is finished. Now we pass on to the lower row, to the tubes that are down. Take the lower brown tube, place it in front of the first pole and behind the second one. Embrace it and lead behind the first one. That's all. Pass on to the orange ones. Take the lower one, place it on the first, lead behind the second, embrace it and lead behind the first one. An open work pattern starts to be seen. On the first one, behind the second, embrace, behind the first one. We take only the lower tubes not to get confused. It is also very important for this pattern. At first I had such a failure, the coils were not smooth. Try to shape the coils with your fingers in such a way to get these crosses smooth. You will see them afterwards. The tubes have to lie tightly. The working tubes don't have to be over-dried, because otherwise they can break here where they bend. It is one of the important points that the tubes mustn't be over-dried. If you feel that they are a little too dry, then you have to soften them a little. Try to keep the poles straight. I have not weighted the form, and I regret it already, because it rotates. I'll correct this mistake right now. And this way weave up to the end of the row. It is the third row. We have finished the third row. Now the upper row of the tubes looks to the right, the lower one looks to the left. We start working with the lower tubes again. Place the lower tube on the first one, lead behind the second one, lead outside. Now it is high time to lengthen the tube. For this type of weaving it is one of the most important points. You have to insert the tubes into each other deeply, because when bending you pull the tubes hard. And in my first works woven with this pattern, several times I had the tubes slide out of each other, the pattern was broken and I had to paste them up. So, take the lower tube, place it on the first one, behind the second one, here where there is a place of connection we soften, embrace and lead behind the first. insert deeply. You have to make such tubes that will be inserted into each other easily. So, on the first one, behind the second, embrace behind the first one. Let's insert the thin one here as deep as possible. On the first one, behind the second, embrace. And this way, lengthen. And continue weaving. On the first one, behind the second, the sequence repeats itself. On the first one, here it is important, you see, my tube tends to bend like this, but I have to lead it here to get the cross neat and smooth. Lengthen. This way. On the first pole, behind the second, soften. And this way continue up to the end of the row. So we have woven the required number of the rows. Let's complete the article. I have tried two varieties of completion. The first case reminds me of a layer wires and zigzag weaving. In the first case, I was lifting the working tubes, twining double tubes round with a rope, and then was cutting after the second or third row. But here the doubled poles can be seen, and in my opinion the pattern is blurred. And then I have tried the second variety, just gluing and cutting. I personally prefer the way the second variety looks, in spite of cutting and gluing. From inside the article looks rather neat as well. The tips we have cut are not very evident. If you watch very attentively, you can recognize them, of course, but here you can see that the pattern is not blurred. So I propose you the second variety. What I do for it? I cut the remainders of the tubes and drop school glue. And now weave using the technique of a regular rope. I cut the tubes while weaving. I have cut one couple of the tubes and start winding around with a rope. Got it? Cut the next one so that the tubes were held by the poles. Drop some glue and continue weaving. Carefully cut the third couple. Drop glue and continue weaving. And this way we finish our zigzag-like pattern. Finishing the conversation about an open work pattern. As usual, I'd like to emphasize the most essential points. First of all, the poles of the base have to be rigid. Secondly, the working tubes mustn't be over-dried. The intervals between the poles have to be short. In this case, it looks neater. One more point. It is necessary to insert one tube into another deeply. It is important to avoid breaking the pattern while weaving and pulling the tubes while shaping an open work. The number of the poles is important. For 2-colored pattern it has to be divisible 4, for 3-colored pattern divisible 6, for 1 color divisible 2. I mean the tubes of the base. Actually, these were all the essential points. Good luck to you!